Today we're covering the terminology related to the cardiovascular system. This is a system that consists of a series of vessels and a pump, the pump being the heart. The job of this system is to transport blood throughout the body from the heart and then return that blood to the heart. When we look at this system, it has one major function, and that function is homeostasis. Homeo means sameness. Stasis means stopping or controlling. So homeostasis is simply controlling sameness. As you learned in your human biology course, homeostasis is the state at which the body is at its optimum. To keep the body at its optimum, it requires oxygen to undergo cellular respiration, and we need to remove the CO2, the end product of that process, to be removed as waste. At the same point, cells will also require nutrients for the process of cellular respiration, and waste products from that must be removed as well. The organs in this system, there are only two. First one being the heart. The heart has two combining forms. The two combining forms are cardio and corono. Cardio is the one we use most often. It can be used for terms that relate to structure, so we would see pertaining to definitions being used in coordination with this combining form. So a term like cardiac. We also use it for conditions like inflammation of the heart, carditis. We also use it for processes like cardiography or, or a cardiogram. So this is the combining form we use most often. Corono gets used but only in regard to structures of the heart. So not the heart, but structures of the heart. For example, if we're looking at a vessel of the heart, we don't call it a cardiac vessel. Instead, we say it's a coronary vessel. So corono is only used in regard to structures of the heart. The heart itself is a muscular pump, and as you see on the diagram to the right, you can notice the thick layers of muscle. When we look at the heart, you can see also from this diagram, it has four distinct chambers, two upper and two lower. The upper chamber is called the atrium. The atrium has a combining form, atrio. This is singular. To make it plural, we would use the term atria. Again, this is the upper heart chamber, and you will notice there's not as much muscle involved in the upper chambers. The right and left chambers, the atria, upper chambers, are separated by connective tissue. This connective tissue is called a septum, septa being plural. The particular septum that we see here gets its name because it means pertaining to between the upper chambers of the heart. That term is interatrial septa. Now, when we look at the lower chambers, each one is called a ventricle. The combining form is ventriculo. Please note the change in spelling as you go from ickle to iculo. That's a common thing we will see with that ending ICLE, and we'll see it again later on. But note it here because spelling is an issue with this term. Now this is a lower chamber of the heart. Again, there are two of those lower chambers. Here though, to make it plural is very easy as we simply add an S. So ventricles is plural. Once again, you can see there is a septum between the lower chambers. And when we look at the septa that separates these two, and all the different hearts that people have, it's always the same. It gets its name because it means pertaining to between the lower chambers of the heart. As you may have already figured out, that term would be the interventricular septa. From here we go to the next structure of the heart that you can see in the diagram, and those are the valves. Valves are very similar to sphincters that we saw in the digestive system. Sphincters in that system kept food moving in one direction from mouth to anus and prevented backflow. But those were muscular structures controlled by the muscle itself. Valves are totally different. A valve here is very much like a valve you would use in plumbing. It simply opens and closes due to pressure exerted on either side of the valve, and that's what happens here. Now, when it comes to the valves, their job is to prevent backflow from the lower chamber back to the upper chamber. There are two combining forms for valves, valvo and valvulo. These are used interchangeably. I've even read articles where the author used the same suffix with both combining forms in the same article. So these are truly interchangeable. Therefore, as I've said all semester, choose the one you can spell. Again, the function of these is to prevent backflow from the lower chamber back to the upper chamber. As we'll see later, blood always flows from the upper chamber to the lower. When we look at these valves, they are made up of flaps or cusp of tissue. The two valves that we see are the mitral or bicuspid valve. It gets its name simply because bi means two, so there are two cusps of tissue that make this valve, whereas the tricuspid has three cusps of tissue. Tri is the prefix that means three. When we look at the heart, we will notice a parallel between this organ and what we saw with the uterus in the female reproductive system. The heart has three distinct tissue layers, just as we saw in the uterus, and the names are very similar. The first is the endocardium. The second is the myocardium. The third is the pericardium. And you can see how close these are to the endometrium, myometrium, and perimetrium we talked about in the female reproductive system. The endocardium, as you can see from the diagram over here, is the internal layer. It's made up of epithelial tissue, and it is going to line the heart. So this innermost layer is made up of epithelial tissue, not much different than we saw in the other organ systems of the body. The combining form for the endocardium is endocardio. When we look at the myocardium, it has the combining form myocardio. Myo, as we've already learned, means muscle. So this is the muscle tissue layer of the heart. Pericardium, peri means surrounding. So this is the outermost tissue layer. And when we look at the pericardium, it has the combining form pericardio. And this is the connective tissue layer that's going to hold all of these layers together and provide some protection to the heart itself. Remember, just as we talked about in the female reproductive system, these combining forms are not to be split apart. They have to stay as one. For example, the term endocarditis. If you broke it into three components, endo, cardo, and itis, you would get the definition, inflammation within the heart. But as you saw on the previous slide, the heart is a hollow organ. Inflammation can only be of tissues or organs, not of empty space. So we cannot define it as inflammation within the heart. That would not make sense. Instead, we define it based on the combining form endocardio, so it becomes inflammation of the lining of the heart. The next organs we talk about are the blood vessels. These are what are responsible for carrying blood to the heart and away from the heart. When we look at the blood vessels, there are three combining forms: angio, vaso, and vasculo. Angio will be the combining form we use most often. It can be used with suffixes meaning pertaining to, as well as with terms related to conditions or procedures. So inflammation of a vessel would be angiitis. If we look at disease of the vessel, angiopathy. If we look at the inflammation of a vessel, angiitis. Vaso is used, but not very often. We will see it either involved with the suffix constriction, so vasoconstriction, or the suffix dilation, vasodilation. But that's really about it. You don't see it much more often than that. And the reason for this is that vaso is also the combining form that we saw in Chapter 9 on the male reproductive system, which is used for the vas deferens. So a vasotomy would not be the surgical cut of a vessel, but would be the surgical cut of the vas deferens. Vasculo is used even less. The only time I've ever really seen this term is with the suffix AR. I've also heard that it can be used with itis, but I've never seen it that way. So you understand this is one we probably won't use very often at all. Angio is the one we use most often. When it comes to the vessels, there are three. The first are the arteries. The arteries have two combining forms, artero and arterio. These two are truly interchangeable. So again, as we've said all semester, use the one you can spell. Arteries are going to carry blood away from the heart. Now, some of you were mistakenly informed in high school that arteries carry oxygenated blood. This is mostly true, but not completely true. Some arteries, like the pulmonary artery, which goes from the heart to the lungs, do not carry oxygenated blood. So that's why we just use the definition, carry blood from the heart. When we look at the structure of arteries, we will see they are very muscular. This allows them to change their diameter. When they constrict, the diameter becomes narrowed, and this will decrease blood flow. When that happens, it will increase blood pressure. When the blood vessels dilate, when the muscle relaxes, now we'll get increased blood flow, which will lower blood pressure. When we look at the arteries, they are directly connected to the next vessel, which are the capillaries. Capillaries are blood vessels used primarily for exchange. So all the oxygen and CO2, all the nutrients and waste are exchanged through these vessels. There's no combining form for the capillaries, and the reason for that is simple. They are extremely small. So small you cannot see them unless you're using a microscope. So until our technology gets better that we can work on these small vessels, we won't have a combining form for them or procedures that are performed on them. The capillaries themselves are made up of very thin walls. This makes them extremely permeable, allowing them to exchange oxygen and CO2, waste for nutrients. Capillaries are connected directly to arteries as well as the veins, which are the next blood vessel. Veins have two combining forms, veno and flebo. Veno is used only in describing the structure of a vein. So anytime we have a pertaining to suffix, it will be used in combination with veno. So a term like venic. Flebo is used for conditions or procedures. So when we look at, for example, inflammation of the vein, it's not venitis, it's phlebitis. If we're looking at the surgical cut of a vein, it's phlebotomy. Veins are used to carry blood toward the heart. Once again, some of you were misinformed in high school that veins carry deoxygenated blood. Again, this is mostly true, but not always true. Veins sometimes carry oxygenated blood, such as in the pulmonary vein, which goes from the lungs to the heart. That's why we always use the definition that they carry blood to the heart, not whether or not the blood is oxygenated. When we look at the veins themselves, we see they are directly connected to the capillaries, and also that their walls are much thinner than arteries. Although some do contain muscle, most do not. And what you will see to prevent backflow is that now, since they cannot constrict or dilate to alter pressure, they use a valve. This valve is not much different than what we saw in the heart. It's not a muscular controlled structure. It's just a flap of tissue, a cusp of tissue. And when the pressure stops and blood tries to flow back, it shuts the valve, preventing backflow. As you see from the structure over here to the right, you can see how the arteries, capillaries, and veins connect. And when you look at the next picture, you can see the actual structure of each. And you can note the thick walls of the artery versus the valves in the vein. Blood flow is very important. When we look at the diagrams for this chapter, I am not going to make you memorize the one for the heart. The reason for that is, in case we get sent back to Lewis and Clark and have this class on campus, I cannot show you that picture in black and white. Because it has the blue color and the red color, that's very important for us to know what we're looking at. So when you try to print that off, it just doesn't come out very well. So I'm not going to use any diagrams. Instead, we're going to focus on blood flow. In my notes on my chapter outline, you're going to see blood flow, the complete blood flow listed. You need to go through this and know it, because that's definitely something I will ask you about on the exam. Now, when we look at blood flow in the body, it's what we call double circulation. What that means is that we have a pulmonary and a systemic circulation. Those two combine to make up the double circulation. Pulmono means lung. So pulmonary means pertaining to the lungs. So this circulation is going to go from heart to lung and then lung to heart. Systemic, systemo is referring to the system, which in essence means the rest of the body. So this term means pertaining to the rest of the body. So what we're going to see now in systemic circulation is blood going from the heart to the rest of the body, and then from the rest of the body back to the heart. As you see on this diagram here, you can note the systemic versus pulmonary circulation and how that reflects on oxygen and CO2 content. When we look at the diagram on the right, now you can see how this relates to all the different vessels involved. I'm not going to make you know each vessel. I want you to know just the basic flow as listed in my outline. Heartbeat is the last thing we're going to discuss in regard to physiology. Heartbeat is extremely important because it's going to involve two components. The first is going to be what we learned in chapter 10, and that is in order to contract a muscle, you're going to need the nervous system to innervate it. The second point is that we're going to need a muscle for the nervous system to innervate, and that's where the heart and the brain connect. Now here for heartbeat, we're going to see the innervation being started in the medulla oblongata and being sent to the heart itself. In the heart, we will see a collection of nervous tissue. That is called the sinoatrial node, abbreviated SA node. This node is a collection of nervous tissue on the right atrium. Now, when you look at the right atrium, you will see this collection right at the very top. And what that means is the heartbeat is going to initiate there, spread down and across the heart from that point. From the SA node, where heartbeat is initiated, we're now going to see the signal transmitted down to the next collection of nervous tissue directly below, called the AV node. Now, this stands for the atrioventricular node. So as the name implies, it's right in between the upper and lower chambers. From this point, the signal will go through the last set of nervous tissue called the bundle of His to the remainder of the heart. When you look at this diagram, you can see the SA node, the AV node, and the bundle of His, and how that's going to take the electrical impulse from the medulla oblongata, starting at the upper right side of the heart, down and across the heart. When we look at heartbeat itself, it consists of a pattern of contraction followed by relaxation. You can see that here in the cardiogram. The peaks that you see that are very large and short, those wavelengths are of the heartbeat itself. The shorter peaks that are much more elongated, that's showing you the relaxation. Systole is the time in which the heart is contracting. Those are the large peaks that you see. Whereas diastole is the time where the heart is undergoing relaxation. And those are the short wavelengths that you're seeing. Other combining forms that we need to know are listed here. I'm also going to give you some terms I want you to look at to break down and define, bringing those to our discussion on Wednesday. The first term is athero. Athero means plaque. Define atherectomy. Brachio means arm. I want you to define brachialgia. Cholesterolo means serum cholesterol. Now, folks, serum cholesterol is not the same as cholesterol. Cholesterol is a molecule made in your liver, taken by your bloodstream to all the cells of the body to be a component of the cell membrane. However, here we're looking at serum cholesterol. This is obtained in your diet. These are the fatty acids you eat in your diet. Some are more beneficial than others, and we want to look at these in regard to your bloodstream. The term I want you to look at is hypercholesterolemia. Cyano means blue. What is cyanosis? Mano means pressure. Now I'm going to hold a term for this one until we move a little bit further down the list. Myxo means mucus. What then is myxoma? Now remember, the suffix oma we've talked about several times. It has three definitions, so which one applies here? Oxo means oxygen. Define hyperoxia. Rhythmo means rhythm. Before we move on, pay strict attention to the spelling. You see 2 R's for rhythmo, only 1 for rhythm. The term I want you to break down and define is one very important as we move to our next slide and look at conditions, and that is arrhythmia. Sphygmo, notice the pronunciation, the PH makes an F sound. Sphygmo means pulse. The term I want you to look at is combining sphygmo and mano, and that term is sphygmomanometer. The last one is stetho. Stetho means chest. And the term I want you to look at is one that you're going to think is very easy at first, but when you really look at the definition, it's going to be kind of confusing, and that is stethoscope. On Wednesday, we're going to talk about some conditions and procedures as we meet for basically an office hour where you can ask questions and you and I can communicate a little bit more. The conditions I want you to look at are right here. Pay strict attention to all of these, along with the procedures I've listed below. Understand that the cardiovascular system is the key system because cardiovascular disease is the #1 cause of death in both men and women. Please go through all of these. Make sure you have questions prepared so you can ask me in regard to any of these where you're not sure. We will talk about some of them, but because of this system and me being so new with it, I don't know how much of these I can really show you. So please bear with me on this. Also, do not be afraid to go onto YouTube and look for videos in regard to all of these to get a visual of what we're discussing. If you have any questions on anything that I've put into this preparation, please let me know. You can call me or you can email me. If not, we'll just talk to each other again on Wednesday.